Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Genetec Innovate Everyday panel series. My name is Andrew Elvish. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Genetec, and I want to thank you for taking time to join us today to take a look at how Genetec and its partners are innovating together to deliver innovative new solutions that will help us as we navigate this new phase of going back to work and establishing the new normal. I want to remind everybody who's joining us today that this is an interactive discussion, so don't be shy to drop your questions into the question box right over here on the side of your screen. We have moderators behind the scenes who will send those over to me and make sure I ask them. And I'm interested in your opinions. We did this session this morning for early birds and Western European attendees, and we had a lot of good interaction, and we had a lot of interesting people join us. So I think we'll have just as many interesting people joining us this afternoon, so don't be shy. Now, it's not just about me here to talk. I am just the moderator to keep the discussion going. We have an amazing panel of experts to talk with you today, so I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to invite my panelists out, so come on out, everyone. Let's see if everybody can take themselves up. There we go. Hello, Teresa, David, Thibaut, welcome everyone. I'm so glad you could join us, and for our audience, we have two people from Genetec today, and two people from our technology partner ecosystem. So without further ado, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves, and I will mix it up for this session, and I will start with you, Teresa, if you could introduce yourself.
Okay, great. Thanks, Andrew. I'm Teresa Liou. I'm the Senior Director of Product Management at Quanergy Systems. What I do is I am in charge of product strategy and product definition at the company. Quanergy is actually a startup based in California, and we specialize in LiDAR hardware and software. And the exciting thing about the company is that LiDAR has traditionally been a technology that people use and associate with autonomous vehicles, other traditional markets like mapping and industrial automation. But we've seen in the last few years a lot of interest in LiDAR for new markets like security and smart city and smart spaces that would allow us to partner with great companies like Genetec. And so these customers are interested in the analytics and insights that we can offer in conjunction with Genetec. And Quanergy is a pioneer in this space in terms of developing solutions for these new markets in security and smart spaces.
I'm really glad to have you here today, Teresa, and indeed we're really impressed with some of the stuff we're seeing from Quanergy, and I can't wait to talk a bit more about your Cortex solution in a little bit. But first, let's say hello to Mo from our good friends at HID. Mo.
Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you very much, Andrew, for having us, but also for kind of setting the scene for the session today. I'm Mohammed, Mo, more often known, Joueid from HID Global. I am the Director for Technology Integration, and I'm primarily tasked with driving strategic and technology integration with some of our key partners like Genetec. I'm excited to be here because for a quite considerable amount of time, HID have been talking about connected buildings. Now we've seen the trends that are out there, typically driven by the drive for having smarter buildings to get more data back from that building. There's also these major vessels of change that are happening around us in the form of cloud mobility. But from our perspective, real-time location services, or RTLS as we'll call it throughout the course of the session, has also been a compounding technology that aims to really revolutionize how we interact with our buildings. A few years back, HID saw a lot of changes in the market and made some very strategic investments including a particular acquisition, which has subsequently spawned up a product which we call HID Location Services. In brief, it's an IoT enterprise enablement platform. It's primarily tasked with helping organizations secure and retrieve information, but also in the current climate, we've seen the technology being taken by organizations to really a whole nother level. And in particular, we're looking at addressing social distancing, as well as physical distancing, but also looking at contact tracing. We've seen some organizations actually apply the technology for hand hygiene as well, and embedding RTLS into that. There's also, I could go on forever, Andrew. So I think what I'll do is I will probably cut it there and hand back to you.
I think you've got our entire audience very excited. Both of you have given us a little tantalizing look at what's in store over the next hour together. So thank you very much for your introduction. We have a lot to dig into, but first let's see who's joined us from Genetec. And I'm going to ask my colleague and good friend, David Lenot, to say hello to everyone. David.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Andrew. Good afternoon, good morning. My name is David, and I'm based in Paris, France, where I'm leading the airport practice. We also care for airlines and actually also for seaports. And here with my team, we're actually developing, co-developing applications specifically for airports, airlines, and seaports, in the field of physical security, as you would expect, but also operations and intelligence. And I'm super excited to be here to see how we can help some of those folks to get back to normal. As we all know, some of the airports and airlines have some tangible concerns to be addressed those days. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's a big challenge. Thank you very much, David. And last but not least, somebody who's been with me on a few of these panels already and is providing amazing insights about access control, Thibaut Louvet. Thibaut, why don't you?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning. Hello, Andrew. Well, I'm Thibaut, and I'm the director for the access control product group at Genetec. I oversee from product marketing, product management, development, and everything related to support and delivery for everything related to access control at Genetec. I've been for 15 years at Genetec. I'm based in Montreal now. For the last 7 years, I've been based in Montreal, but I come from our Parisian office where I was in sales before. And look, if there is one thing that make our solution makes our solution different from the rest of the market is that we have an open architecture approach to access control since day one. And so I'm really glad to be with our partner here, because we really bring together innovation to the market thanks to an open architecture approach and a collaborative work together. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Well, I think you kicked it off very well there, Thibaut, and I'd like you to stay with that because I'm going to pass my first question over to you. You know, at Genetec, we've talked a lot about looking beyond the door when it comes to access control, but maybe you can sort of set up the framework for what we're about to discuss and why Genetec is uniquely suited to bringing together partner technology, especially around things like access control and understanding occupancy within buildings.
Well, you know, Andrew, open architecture was at the essence of our access control since day one, but also the idea that we need to look beyond locking and unlocking the doors was really a driver for the development of our solution. So we are looking more at operational efficiency and being insightful for our customers than really just locking and unlocking doors. So if you look at Security Center, it's more than access control. It's a combination of multiple data source, multiple sensors, different technology put together into a single pane of glass in order to provide a clear understanding of what's happening within a facility. So access control is one part of it, but it's complemented by different source of data, and real-time localization, and known as RTLS, is actually a very good complement to that when it comes to understand the flow of people within your facilities, or when it comes to control this flow of people, which is kind of a current necessity.
Absolutely. And, you know, we're seeing more and more pressure being put on administrators of buildings. I mean, I myself am part of the Back to Genetec committee that's helping the facilities teams come together and prepare our campuses for the employees to return to work. And there's a great deal of expectation that we should be able to account for, you know, safety at the office and allow employees to focus on their work and not worrying about you know, proximity and, you know, their health. So that's one of the big concerns. And people are looking to us to sort of validate that. And things like real-time location services are super important in that discussion. So Mo, I want to come over to you. Can you talk to us a little bit about HID location services and how that comes together with a platform like Genetec to deliver that view into an organization?
Indeed, I can, Andrew. It's interesting, right? Because I think perhaps last year, Genetec saw a very specific requirement for real-time person tracking, whether it's personnel, assets, resources, etc., from a very specific vertical, I must add. And by sheer coincidence or by ingenious intel, the solution is actually prime time now, based on what we're currently seeing happening in the market. We've seen a plethora of demands and requests that have come in, where organizations are really looking at putting the RTLS solution into practice. So working in conjunction with the Genetec product management team, they have developed what we call an RTLS plugin. And effectively what it does is it takes a very rich data set from our platform and actually renders that information within the security center platform, Plan Manager in particular, to really bring that data to life. So a lot of interaction there, a lot of intel analytics that can give you some great insights into how people are utilizing the building. Now, what's interesting is, again, workplace optimization was one of the prime candidates for this type of technology. It's really understanding how are people interacting with the building. Now, on the other hand, what we're really talking about is how are people interacting with one another. I think that is a real pillar of how the technology is being applied. And I think it's important, as you mentioned, Andrew, up and down the country, regardless of where you happen to be. I happen to be in London. We as employees, I think we all actually can put ourselves in the shoes of these employees themselves. Whenever we're going back to work, when that actually happens, we're all looking at our organizations to put in place practices that actually can help us go into work confidently knowing those processes and practices are in place. So our RTLS technology today is finding itself into a number of different applications, but primarily, Andrew, it's empowering organizations to put a safe working environment into place, be it for employees or visitors. It's allowing organizations to return to near normal levels of productivity with that confidence in place. And more importantly, it's empowering employees to get back to work safely without compromising privacy. Now, as I always allude back to, privacy is a key component here. PII is something that often comes into mind whenever we're talking about tracking technology. We've seen it in the video space. Equally, we'll see it emerge here. It's important to emphasize anyone who's interested in RTLS technology that's been talked about today, it can be applied in a number of different manners. One, in a completely anonymous mode, or secondly, in a mode that allows you to couple data together to bring that information to allow you to create greater insight. So the technology at play here, Andrew, is very much respectful of privacy, empowering organizations to choose whether they use it or not. My final point is, you know, we often watch the news, we see a situation developing. Governments around the world are taking a very different outlook on COVID-19 as the pandemic evolves. Whether you're in North America, whether you're in Europe, different states are actually looking at applying different regulatory requirements. The technology that we have allows you to put in place a building block, allows you to capture that data and evolve as the situation evolves. Andrew, back to you.
Thank you very much, Mo. And I think one of the things I'm really interested in is, you know, and Thibaut, maybe your best place to answer this is, how do we actually, you know, Mo was talking about the HID location services and RTLS. How do we visualize this? How does an operator actually know what's going on? Can you talk a little bit about the implementation within the platform, Thibaut?
Yes, of course. RTLS service from HID is actually a cloud-based service we connect to, and we can inject the data within Security Center through a plugin, RTLS plugin we have. And the way that an operator will consume that data is by leveraging a Plan Manager. So our mapping engine, where you already have tons of information that you can actually correlate together on a map. Well, this is an additional information you have. So you can track people over the map. You can see the occupancy level over the map. You have access to those statistics as well. So you will be able to have some dashboards with some measures to stay in control of your facilities. So when it comes to maximum occupancy, we know that we have to minimize the quantity of people per area. You have a real-time visualization of that. There's also some reporting capabilities that we have implemented, where if someone is known as being infected by the virus, you want to actually trace back all the other resources, people that were at close proximity of that person. So you have this ability within Security Center. So the same that you would do for a contact tracing with information from a door that we have implemented a few months back. So you also have this ability to trace back, to do some forensic on the data of the localization, the localization data of people. So it's really a seamless integration through a plugin. From an operator perspective, it's really part of the unified experience of Security Center.
And I would imagine an operator has full access to things like event to action, alarm triggers, and even the Cipelia intercom function.
Yes, you're right. It's a very good remark. I forgot that, but you can, well, it's a unified platform. You can combine the information from there to act on other systems. So if you were in a situation where you exceed the maximum occupancy level that you set for a zone, you could just trigger a lockdown, for example. So nobody will be able to enter anymore. So you really remove the complexity of applying the regulation and really make the systems works for you and apply this without the need of a human intervention. So yeah. That's deeply integrated into Security Center, actually.
So Mo, while we're on the topic of workplaces and work environments, we have employees. How do you understand where they are with the HID location services? Is it through like a fob or a beacon that I would carry?
Yeah, Andrew, I mean, you make a good question. Just to kind of lead off from Thibaut's point, a lot of contact tracing, as we now refer to it, what it effectively does is, if we need to identify, or should I say, most other access control platforms, if they need to determine who's come into contact with which users, again, a term which we normally call contact tracing, they normally just kind of check their access control logs to identify who's been in the same room or who's been in the same zone. Now, that doesn't really tell us a lot of data. It only tells us that you may have been in the same or behind the same portal or door, but it doesn't necessarily give us much more insight into that. The technology at play that Thibaut's talking about gives us data that's at a whole different level. It allows us to actually pinpoint people down to sub-meter type distances. It allows us to actually identify in particular how long people were exposed to one another for. So it gives us information that the prior built beforehand without RTLS just was not at our disposal. As far as beacons are concerned, the point you raised there, Andrew, it's an interesting one. So HID are commonly known for providing access control badges. That's one of the things we're known for. But typically what we've found is that sensors, IoT sensors, or sensors in a generic sense, have become as important in the everyday world as badges are. So our RTLS portfolio includes a whole number of sensors, or beacons as we sometimes call them. They take various different form factors, including the form factor of a badge, including the form factor of a smartphone, I'd also add. And these become the means by which we identify a user or an asset. In terms of to get that data back, what we use is gateways, and these gateways can be typically AC powered, DC powered, so they can be wall or ceiling mounted. They can be powered through solar and other means at our disposal. We create a mesh of data, we pull in that information, we run some analytics on top of that, and then we then render that data. And it's an interesting point, I want to just come back to this because what differentiates HID in this particular portfolio is, for the last few years, HID really, and in conjunction with Genetec, have been talking to our end users about using the smartphone as a badge to get access to facilities and so forth. What we're now doing is really pushing the boundaries here, Andrew. We're talking about using the smartphone as a beacon, not only to get you through a door, but as an RTLS beacon, allowing us to identify where you are at any point in time and using that information to really make intelligent decisions. Again, a term that I haven't used yet, smart buildings. This is allowing organizations to become that more smarter without necessarily the cost overhead of a smart building.
That's great to know. Absolutely fascinating stuff, Mo, and really great innovation from HID. And now I want to shift over to, so we've been talking about employees in sort of a setting of an office where we have badges, we're credentialed, we know we're going into a space where we will be, within a space where, hopefully somebody knows we're there. Let's turn our attention to large open spaces, airports, venues, plazas, large areas where people come and go, and they likely don't necessarily all have credentials. So I want to put it over to you, Teresa, so you can introduce us to Cortex and give us a little story about how that plays in these larger areas where we don't really know who's there.
Sure. So let me begin by explaining a little bit about LiDAR technology, because there's probably a lot of folks out there that are not as familiar with this technology. So LiDAR actually stands for light detection and ranging. And the way that the sensor works is that it's actually sending out pulses of laser beams. And those light beams are actually reflecting off of objects. And based on those reflections, we can actually measure the distance that that object is from the sensor. And because we're shooting out, hundreds of thousands of points of light, you can actually compile all that information to detect and get a map of the 3D environment around the sensor. And that map and that visual of that environment is actually a centimeter accurate level 3D map as well. And so with LiDAR, what you can do is actually, because we're shooting out basically points of light, it's inherently a private, inherently a privacy based technology. So there's no identifying information about the person at all. There's no opt-in required for the technology as well, as long as the object is within the field of view of the sensor, and there's a direct line of sight for the object, then we can actually identify the object. And so a lot of folks are using LiDAR and our Cortex solution in the context of sort of social distancing in terms of occupancy management for, as you mentioned, large venues like airports, stadiums, theme parks, casinos, for measuring occupancy within closed spaces like stores, conference rooms, or particular zones within buildings to make sure they stay within a particular occupancy limit. But because we have such accurate distance measurement between objects, you can actually determine, what the social distance is between two objects, and we can track that historically. And so people can use that information to determine, if there are maybe bottlenecks or, they need to change the layout of the building, for instance, to free up some of the crowds and congestion that might be happening.
That's really interesting. LiDAR is certainly a powerful technology. And David, why is it so important? I think I have a pretty good guess, but why is it so important, especially in airports and large areas like this, that we understand movement? Most of us are very nervous about going to an airport, to be honest. Can you talk a little bit about how airports are taking advantage of this technology?
Yes, sure, Andrew. So a few things about that. First of all, airports have always been about flow of people, flow of aircraft. And we realize that right now the flows have become sort of very small. And what we all want collectively is that people can go back to airports. So airports are interested in making sure their employees would feel comfortable coming back and caring for passengers. And passengers really need that feeling of safety and security when they will be able to resume traveling, which is still limited in many places. So yeah, that limit is currently has a lot to do with legal regulation, so with government decision to open or leave airport closed. And once those airports are open again from the regulator, then everything has to be put in place so that people can travel safely. So how does it look like? It's the same if you go into a shop in your neighborhood, or if you go to an airport, you expect that a lot of measures would be visible to you as a visitor. So you probably expect that you'll be prompted to wear a mask, to use a gel on your hands, that you'll see a limited amount of people around you, and that they will keep their distances. And how does that work? If you're a shop owner, if you're an airport terminal director, you just go there and then you see how the location looks like, and you decide on a series of measures. So you will limit the access to people. You will set a maximum number of people per area. You will block some zones. You will put some signage. You will do whatever it takes so people cannot get too close to each other and feel safe doing so. And that's great. And you can do the best planning you want. Then you will implement the measures. And then what? Is it working? Is it not working? How good is it implemented? And what we said we need, which I have to read back, is we need objective measurements, right? Which is different from implementing measures and then sending somebody on the show floor and asking the person, is it looking good, or how are we doing? And you cannot expect a human being to, measure the distance between every individual, count the people, see if they all wear masks, see if they're all using gel on their hands. No one can do it. You would not trust anyone coming back to you and saying, yeah, it's looking great, we're doing good, the measures are fantastic. I wouldn't believe it, and as a traveler, I'd be very anxious that measures are actually applied. So that's why we use that technology. It's to be able to have objective measurements. So you deploy LiDARs, you deploy beacons, and in a reasonably scientific way how many people are there, how close they are from each other, and at the end of it, what if the measures you've taken are effective or not. And if they're effective, good for you. If they're not effective, you'll go back to the drawing board and figure out new ways of fixing things. And you can demonstrate this. You can demonstrate to your owner, to your director, you can demonstrate to your customer, your visitors, with screens, with dashboards, with graphical representations, with numbers. You can represent how good this all works and how safe it is to be in your premises.
Wow, it's so important that we demonstrate a concrete measure to people who are entering these spaces in terms of driving comfort and the willingness to go back to some of these businesses and venues. But Teresa, to that point, are you seeing interest in your Cortex product in other markets other than just airports? I mean, airports is a very important one, but I can see a lot of other applications for this.
Sure, definitely. We have interest in this for just basically any sort of public space where you have crowds of people. For example, stadiums, they want to bring fans back, but in a very safe and measured way. So they're looking at sort of occupancy and social distancing type of technologies, public transportation in terms of the capacity of buses and trains, obviously retail locations, understanding occupancy, because also a lot of times, the local government might also have restrictions on in terms of square footage, how many people are allowed in a particular space as well. So there's a need also for compliance with any local laws that might exist as well. Also theme parks, casinos, just basically anywhere that you would normally see crowds of people. They're interested in deploying this. Even businesses, there was one local office that I went to that was a combination of office and manufacturing area, and they were also interested in having occupancy and social distancing solution to do things like understand bathroom occupancy and how often they should be cleaning areas based on the dynamic usage of a particular space. Also sort of going back to talking about airports, airports is definitely a very common usage as well. But even before sort of this whole COVID pandemic, we had customers using our solution in the airport arena just for, as David was mentioning, flow management and crowd management applications, and being able to look at, say, TSA security areas or check-in areas and determining wait times and coming up with a queue management solution. And so, for instance, in Miami Airport, we have a customer that originally implemented a system to do those functions, but with this new sort of new world that we're living in, they've actually been able to pivot that solution to also add social distancing on top of that as well.
And that's been a key focus of Genetec. Rather than telling people to go out and buy a whole bunch of new kit or deliver new software, we're like, use what you have, but think about it in a new way. And that's a lot about what Innovate Every Day is about. Now, David, I want to come back to you as we talked to Thibaut about how he is working with HID location services and RTLS within the unified platform. How does the Quanergy Cortex solution come to life within the Security Center unified platform?
Yeah, Andrew. So it's sort of a similar architecture, if you wish, where we unify this additional source of data. So it's a new type of technology, new sensors, a new data stream that we ingest. And then we leverage that data by combining it with other sensors data And we create KPIs, we create indicators, which to start with project. So we create dashboards, widgets, in form of simple dashboards, as you would expect, with graphs and donuts and numbers and percentage. Or we can also have those widgets on Plan Manager, so you get the feel for the location where those numbers are belonging to. And then, most importantly, we don't just display the information, so we don't just tell you, oh, it's bad, but we tell you where it's bad, we tell you how it's bad, and then we tell you how you can get fastest possible back to normal. That's the trick, really, right? I think acquiring a sensor, acquiring a dashboard today is reasonably simple. So you'll find a screen telling you it's looking bad, but then what's next? So the idea and what we deliver and what people consume from us is the assistance to get back to normal fastest possible. So you're off plan. How do I get back on plan or to normal level as soon as possible? That's the resolution. That's not only displaying understanding, but what's next? That's automating the system response. So if this occurs, what should the system do? What should operator receive as notice and information? And what should they do if it's too crowded? What should they do? Should they send a public announcement message? People, please just be mindful and respectful of other people, so stay further away. Should we close door? Should we limit access? And then what should the operator do further down the line? Open new doors or close further doors, reach out to supervisor, to people on the ground, and then close the incidents and then get back to normal. So that's the entire chain which we provide with the unification and incident management supports architecture.
Which reminds me, Andrew, just to add on to David's point there, one of the beauties of the integration that we've done with Genetec Security Center is really kind of not leave the video behind. We've tried to kind of tap in through the course of the integration to existing data streams. And as David kindly put, it's not about bringing in the data, it's how we can use that. And to give you an example, one of the functions that we actually implemented is the ability for duress. So if an issue occurs, if, for example, somebody kind of is taken ill, there is a duress function. That duress function raises an alert within Plan Manager. What an operator of Plan Manager can immediately then do is pinpoint, locate the nearest camera and get a real-time video feed of what's happened and what's caused that duress alert to be triggered. Again, a great example of how we can combine Genetec platform with RTLS with video management capability.
And I don't know if you, well, just Andrew, I don't know if you've seen lately, but there is really a trending adoption of mission control, and I think it can be explained by that. David, you touch a point. I mean, the guided response is essential. So being able to acquire the data, to display the data to the operator, bring the information and the insight to the operator, but also guide him through the response. Because the problem is that we see the regulation changing every day, every week lately. We have to adapt. We have to adapt quickly. So yes, you have technology that help you be in control, respond to that, and we have technology also that will work for you with standard operating procedures and automated workflow to manage a situation and remove the burden on the operator.
I think that's a great point, Thibaut, bringing in that idea of mission control and dynamic standard operating procedures. So Thibaut, because it's a unified platform, all of those products, whether it's the intercom product or mission control, they can all take advantage of this IoT network, whether it's the HID location services or Quanergy Cortex. Those can all feed into triggers for workflows.
Yes, exact. So that could be a combination of those. So you can say the threshold of occupancy level is reached, and there is a call from an intercom, and this will define a specific situation, and then you will run the standard operating procedure that is attached to that to guide the operator towards this response. So it's really the unified play that allows you to have all these different source of data, all these data points work together, and by being correlated into a rules engine, define the situation and guide the operator. That's what makes Security Center really different from other platforms.
So moving away from the tech, and Mo, you brought this up a little earlier, is this idea of smart buildings and smart spaces. And I think many of us who are grappling with, back to work in September or October, I mean, we'd love to be in fancy glass towers that are brand new and built to spec, but does this technology like HID location services, does it only work? Do you have to build that in a brand new building, or can we take advantage of it in a fairly short time frame and sort of implement that in older buildings?
One of the beauties here, Andrew, of the technology that we have is the rapid pace of deployment. It's been specific because it uses BLE technology, and in addition to that Wi-Fi, it is very easy for us, one, to issue out the beacons with which we track people, resources, assets, but the gateways themselves, which actually capture that information back to us, they are very easily deployed. As I mentioned earlier on, they can be AC powered, they could be DC powered, they could be solar powered as well. With that in place, it is very, very easy for us to deploy that. Subsequently, bringing down the total cost of ownership, but allowing us also to provide very tangible return on investments for most organizations. So I like to think of it, Andrew, as our way of actually making the building smarter, as I mentioned earlier, without necessarily the massive investments that are needed often. And coincidentally, when we saw this pandemic arising, there were a lot of organizations that were contacting us saying, we want a rapid deployment kit. We want to install something, but guess what? We don't want anybody coming to our buildings. So what we've done is we designed a canned solution. It was a fixed price, fixed bid material, and it was actually designed whereby we could put it in a box, ship it out to you, you unpackage it, you connect up the connection points, and the intention is within a day or two, you've got yourself an RTLS solution that's all singing, all dancing. That, in my opinion, Andrew, is kind of demonstrative of the power and the capability with which the platform operates and the means with which we can allow customers to really tap in and get the value without waiting months to see the fruits of their labor.
Yeah, so everybody's moving so fast right now. So Teresa, tell us about Cortex. I mean, is it the same sort of deployment timeline, or does it got to be put in at the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, definitely for our solution, you can retrofit this in an existing building. Very, very few of our customer installs are, new greenfield buildings at all. It's a pretty straightforward installation in terms of, we can support wall mounting, ceiling mounting. If it's an outside solution, people can put it on existing poles as well. And so we can basically mount on any sort of existing infrastructure. It's powered by power over Ethernet. So from a cabling point of view, it's fairly straightforward. And we're using generic processing x86 based platforms to run our AI perception software.
Sorry, I was on mute and I was about to talk. So it's a fairly easy thing to deploy. Do integrators who are interested in either of your solutions, do they need to have specific certifications or training required to deploy either a LiDAR or an RTLS solution? Teresa, I'll put it to you.
Sure. So for the LiDAR solution, we do some training for any of the system integrators that we work with. just so that they can understand the system, because there's both a hardware as well as software component to it. But we have a very sort of structured training program in order for them to understand, and very extensive documentation as well. And so, we're happy to work with all of our partners for their training programs.
And Mo, what about for the HID solution?
Yeah, we've actually had an interesting few months in particular. You've got the traditional access control partners that have worked with Genetec and HID for many years. As Teresa indicated, some of these guys are very proficient in hardware, less so in software, and sometimes the reverse applies. What we've done is we've invested a lot of time in creating an academy over the last few years. The academy is a free resource that's available to any Genetec partner, any HID partner. They can go online. It's hidglobal.com/training. Once you're registered, there are a variety of location services courses. So there's a location services 101 course, which we normally advise that most partners take. It's an interesting one, Andrew, because at the moment, a lot of our partners are really itching to get their teeth into this technology. It's exciting times, and we'd certainly suggest that a lot of partners actually take up the opportunity, because we feel we're going to have some very interesting months and years ahead of us as organizations really look at RTLS and the power and the new functions and services and applications that they can enable with the technology.
Great. Well, that's great to hear. And for all of our integrators and users out there, I think there's a huge opportunity for this. We've got some questions coming in from the audience, and we have one for you, Teresa, and I'm not exactly sure the context, but it's asking if Cortex LiDAR is an external solution. I think you might mean external to the Genetec platform. So.
Yeah, so it is. So it's a solution that we sell directly through our system integrators, VARs, and distributors. So it consists of a hardware piece, which is the sensor itself. And so depending on what the size of the site is, you could have multiple sensors deployed. And then the other piece to it is the software itself. So it's the AI perception software. And what that software does is it takes the raw sensor data and then performs AI perception on it. And so it generates object information, right? So basically what we can identify is we identify the objects, the classification, the size, the location of all of the objects. And so we provide that information through an API to the Genetec integration that David's team actually has done. And so that's what ends up being visualized.
Okay, that's great. We have another question, also for you, Teresa. Is LiDAR more expensive than a video camera?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think there's a particular perception out there in terms of the price per device that LiDAR is more expensive than cameras, but you actually really have to look at the total cost of ownership for LiDAR compared to cameras as a system overall. So if you look at LiDAR, our coverage area is much more expansive than cameras. So we have more than 15,000 square meters of coverage area for a single LiDAR sensor. And so overall, what we typically find is in a lot of installations, we need a lot less LiDAR sensors than you would need, say, like 3D stereo cameras, right? Based on some scenarios, we've seen cameras total cost of ownership anywhere from 5 to 20x higher than that of LiDAR. And the number of sensors really matters, not only because of the cost of the sensors, but there's also the time and cost of installation itself. If you have many more devices that you have to install, as well as the cabling itself, which can be quite expensive as well. The other thing that we also find comparing LiDAR to, say, like the stereo cameras is that for especially older buildings, which tend to have lower ceilings, that can also really multiply the number of cameras you would need for that installation. And so LiDAR actually works a lot better in terms of, again, like sort of the total cost of ownership and the number of sensors you would need for those installations. And so if you sort of look at the total system cost, I think LiDAR ends up being a more cost-effective solution overall.
Great. Wow, that's really good to hear, and I'm sure that'll be very interesting to a lot of the people I can see on the webinar today. People must be getting very interested in what you have to say. Mo, I have another question about cost and pricing. So people are down to brass tacks here. The question is that there's a lot of different types of RTLS solutions out there, Bluetooth, passive RFID, ultra wideband GPS, and things like that. And they have varying accuracy and costs. How does HID location services stack up against all those technologies?
Indeed, Andrew. I guess there are varying technologies out there. So as I indicated earlier, we use Bluetooth, and there are other technologies out there that equally claim to provide reliable RTLS services. You mentioned a few, there are others out there. The important aspect is Bluetooth notably is a very cheap technology, but yet provides us very great degrees of accuracy. And I would say that anybody who's looking at or comparing a solution or an RTLS offering, as Teresa's indicated, when looking at the variables and kind of compounding them to come up with something, accuracy is an important metric. The range of the technology is important. The cost of the tags, life expectancy of the tag, but also the average cost of the gateways and their coverage areas. All of these actually should come into play when anybody actually looks at comparing on deciding on whether to go with a Bluetooth-based RTLS solution, as we've talked about, or any other out there that you've mentioned, Andrew. What I'd also mention is there are also new technologies, new innovation that's taking place at the moment. Ultra wideband is one particular technology that's really gaining pace in the market. There are a lot of key names really hedging their bets behind ultra wideband. HID is one of those. We are part of a number of consortia, including FIRA. For anybody who's interested in this space, I would certainly suggest you look into FIRA and what that does. There's some interesting videos out there. The UW provides great degrees of accuracy that we've seen with no other technology out there. And what I would emphasize to anybody out there, when we talk about costs, if the technology itself is low cost, but yet the reliability and the accuracy is questionable, then I would say it puts your entire project at jeopardy. Balance out the two, cost and accuracy, and we feel at HID that Bluetooth is ideal technology for delivering the services and the applications we've talked about here today.
Absolutely. Well, that's great. It's very, very compelling, and the fact that both technologies are so applicable in different ways to different types of facilities. Thibaut, we're entering into closing thoughts. How do you see technology like this and the unified platform delivering as we move into the reopening of businesses and offices?
So really, Andrew, you know that we always have been thinking, well, with outside of the door, I would say. So this is really, okay, access control, locking and locking doors is an important part of it, but it's not enough. Having an access control system living into a unified platform bring the ability to close the gap. So I see really the location services as the technology that allows you to cover your blind spot in your facilities, in your building. where you cover the gap between the doors. You have information, accurate information at each doors, and you have tracking capabilities, monitoring capabilities in between those doors with other kind of technology, real-time location technology so it's really a complement, and really the ability to be efficient in coming back to work and being safe and provide the level of safety that employees expect from their employer, or visitors from the company they meet, or the shopping experience we all expect to see come back. I mean, we need, there is not one silver bullet. You need the combination of those technology to actually be able to provide solutions and adapt to the situation.
Great. And David, final thought for you. How do you think this will change the way people approach things like large-scale venues, airports, seaports, and other large gathering places that we were used to going to?
It's obviously a good question, Andrew. I wish I had the perfect answer to this. So I don't know how it's going to be done, but what I'm sure of is people will be more careful understanding what's going on in the premises and how things are happening. So it's all about the flow. How is the flow of people, the flow of vehicles, the flow of things at large, from entering to leaving premises? And it all starts by identifying the right technologies, depending on the site topologies, the type of things you want to monitor, ingesting that data, correlating those data, and then understanding how your building is behaving and how the flow is happening within your buildings. So this is what we see with HID and Quanergy here. We find the right partners to give us those data so we can create those insights. So building owners, enterprises understand and appreciate what's going on, so they can tweak it, they can rationalize it, they can impact it when required. And that's just great. And yeah, just take a chance to say thanks to our great partners that have been so available and quick over the past few months, which were so special for all of us.
Yeah, we're nothing without our partners. So thank you very much, Teresa Liou of Quanergy. Thank you for joining us today. And Mohammed Joueid of HID, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a real pleasure to have a chance to chat with you. And for our audience, this brings panel number 3 of the Genetec Innovate Everyday webinar series to a close, but we have 2 more webinars coming up in the coming 2 weeks. On August 18th, I will be meeting with a great crew of Genetec technologists and talking about identity as the new perimeter. You won't want to miss that if you're interested in cybersecurity and identity. And after that, one that I think will be very much anticipated is on August 26th, and that is machine learning and making sense of data in the pandemic. And we'll be joined by our chief data officer, our chief data scientist, I should say, Sean Lawler, which should be a very interesting chat indeed. I encourage you all to come back. This will be available as a recording on YouTube very soon, so please share it around. And once again, thank you to Quanergy and HID for coming out and sharing their absolutely fantastic innovations. Have a wonderful day, everyone.